And a very warm welcome to Biggin Hill 1993. Now, every June for the past 30 years, the Biggin Hill Airfair has been open to the public. And flying into Biggin over the Thames is Ray Hanna's superb Mark IX Spitfire, and it's been to most of the shows. As we'll see in a minute, the huge record-breaking crowd at Biggin Hill, Biggin on the bump. Let's join the lovely Estelle Matthews, who'll tell us some of the things to look forward to later this afternoon.
Well, it's a beautiful day for Biggin Hill's 30th anniversary, where yet again there's a whole range of fascinating exhibits and new air displays. You'll see behind me the B-17 Sally B, famous for her film role in Memphis Belle. Now back to you, Brian.
Well, first to land on the Biggin runway is the indomitable Hercules. Now, this is flown by squadron leader Dave McIntosh. What an incredible aircraft this is. 4 Allison T-56A-15 turboprops power it, both backwards and forwards, as we'll see later. It's a very, very rugged aircraft indeed. It can land and take off in rough terrain. The RAF use it as a transport workhorse, as you can see, as it disgorges all the jeeps out of the back end, out of that huge door. The fleet is based at RAF Lynham in Wiltshire, with a detached wing right down at Mount Pleasant in the Falkland Islands. There you are, there you can see the Hercules going backwards. I think if you've been watching your television lately, certainly any of the news programs, you'll see many of these aircraft used to great effect for famine relief. They can take an immense cargo, which can either be dropped or, as you can see, landed on very short runways, well, or not even runways at all, just on rough terrain. And here we see the troops thoroughly enjoying themselves with all that smoke all over the place. Something to make the Biggin crowd cough at. Now, squadron leader Dave McIntosh bringing this very large aircraft in very steeply indeed. You see all that lovely black smoke trailing behind the aircraft. And they're coming in dirty, flaps down, undercarriage, great stocky undercarriage built right into the fuselage, and the cargo door open at the rear of the aircraft. That spike on the nose of the aircraft is for refueling, and that's refueling in the air, obviously to give it a much longer range than normal, and it also has extra tanks under the wings that you can see hanging down there between the engines. Whoa, a little bit of negative G there as Dave pulls the aircraft in for a very, very short landing indeed. You can see the angle of attack as he comes in, literally throwing this Hercules onto the Biggin runway. That very tough undercarriage, well able to accept all this. There we go, nice puffs of smoke. And reverse thrust. So you can see how short a time it takes to stop this giant of the air. And now for some stomach-churning aerobatics, sponsored by Breitling, the watch people. And this is Patrick Pons throwing the cap around in the air. Oh gosh, I can't look at this. Well, when he pulls that aircraft down, he's pulling about 3G. That means he's 3 times his own weight. It makes me really rather ill to think about it. Now look at that. Very, very high roll rate on this particular aircraft. CAP always make nice little airplanes that do nasty little things like this. Mind you, I'm quite sure you'll agree that this is a superb display. The way he's throwing the aircraft around with gay abandon. There he is, hanging on the prop. Let the speed decay, and back he comes, and over the top, right over, in fact almost upside down there. Well, here's something a little bit more sedate. The Twin Beech 18. This, of course, was used quite extensively for transport during World War II. Elegant, isn't she? Up above, we have the Sea Prowler, and that's making a very welcome return to Biggin. Nimrod. Now, this was based on the de Havilland Comet fuselage. You can see a lot of similarities if you're old enough. Really, it's just a sort of stretched version and a rather fatter version of the very famous, in fact, it was the first of the jet airliners in the world. Rolls-Royce Spey engines. Nimrod can stay airborne for some 12 hours at a time. It can even loiter over the sea by cutting 2 of its engines and cruising on 2 just to save fuel. And here we see this enormous bomb bay underneath the aircraft, which can carry a multitude of different stores. They're a very, very good view of it. Carries an extensive range of anti-submarine warfare weapons, hard points under the wings for air-to-surface missiles, and it can carry rockets, cannon pods, or even mines. Oh, these Falcons, as you can see, just getting their kit ready. Very sensible idea to pack your own parachute, especially if you've got to jump out of the back of a Hercules. Now let's go back to World War II. Here's a lovely clutch of beautiful aircraft. This is the last really genuine ME-109. It actually has the Mercedes-Benz, or rather Daimler-Benz engine in it. You can tell actually because the ones that have the Merlin engine usually have the exhausts, as you can see, on the Spitfire up at the top of the cowling there. This is the ME-108, flown and owned by Lindsay Walton. He's a farmer. He lives out in Norfolk, and I think that aeroplane has been on the circuit for as many years as I can remember, and it always gets shot down. But this, the genuine ME-109, flown by Mark Hanna. It's actually based up at Duxford and belongs to the Imperial War Museum. Now here's the ME-108. Now this was the forerunner to the ME-109, and William Messerschmitt, who designed both, as you can see, there's quite a lot in common. He was a very, very clever designer indeed, and anyone who underestimates the German aircraft of that period, well, think again. They were very good. Here, of course, is Ray Hanna's marvelous Spitfire that we saw earlier. This really has quite a history. It, in fact, shot down 2 Focke-Wulfs in 1943, so it also has its anniversary this year. And there we have a lovely picture of the 2 enemies up in the air together. What an absolutely beautiful sight. Back to the ME-108, the Germans rather cheated between the wars. They used these for air racing more than anything else. This is how they built up the Luftwaffe in the guise of civil flying. And then, of course, by the Spanish Civil War, a lot of these aircraft were actually turned into fighters and bombers, of course. Back to the Spitfire, used to be owned by Adrian Swire after the war. And in fact, Ray Hanna bought it for his old flying machine company just a few years ago at auction. But Ray, in fact, had been flying it for Adrian Swire for many, many years, and we've seen this superb display at Biggin many, many times. I think, A, it's the prettiest aircraft ever designed, and one of the greatest pilots probably the world has ever known at this sort of thing. Ray Hanna led the Red Arrows. He's the only man to have led them twice, in fact. And there, the lovely silhouette of the Mark 9 Spitfire, absolutely gorgeous, those elliptical wings. It was designed by R.J. Mitchell after the wonderful Schneider Trophy winners, 1929, 30 and 31, when Great Britain won the Schneider Trophy absolutely outright, and in fact you will find it in the Science Museum. That is the genuine article. And he got a lot of his ideas for the Spitfire from that particular aircraft. Now this is something else. This is the Blenheim. Its predecessor was crashed in 1987. It's taken all this time to get this one together again, and what a joy to see it flying. This was its first or second flight, I think, this year since it's been rebuilt. And here, well, the first of the helicopters this afternoon, the Gazelle from the Silver Eagles, that's the Army team, and we're going to see quite a lot of that later on in the programme. And Ray Hanna brings the Spit in for a lovely, gentle landing. See, the Spitfire had a very, very narrow undercarriage, so we could get these very slim wings, and that really is the secret of it, less drag, and that's why it was such a fast aeroplane for its day, and that gorgeous sound of the Merlin engine just ticking over. What a combination that was. Ray, of course, thoroughly enjoys his flying, and he'll fly any of the warbirds as often as he possibly can. Spitfire always got the credit for the Battle of Britain victory, but in fact there were more Hurricanes than Spitfires in the conflict during the Second World War. Both, of course, powered by the same engine, the Merlin from Rolls-Royce. Ray always smiling. And another look at the Blenheim. A lovely close-up during a fast run. It was the first radar-equipped night fighter during World War II, and its crews won no less than 3 Victoria Crosses for actions of immense bravery. Now to a very modern aircraft, the Hawk, 2-seater ground attack and training aircraft, and that's been used in the RAF since 1977. This is from number 63 Squadron, based at RAF Chivener in Devon. The Hawk, of course, is flown by the infamous Red Arrows, and they're on the menu as well, of course. Biggin wouldn't be Biggin without them. There you are, the Black Hawk. Let's go over to Estelle again.
Captain Colin Dunscombe, you're the pilot of the Lynx and also team leader of the Silver Eagles. How long have you been flying?
I've been flying since 1976, when I first started, way back on the days of the Sioux helicopter.
And when did you start flying the Lynx?
In 1983.
And just how difficult is it to fly this helicopter?
It's quite a simple helicopter to fly. It's got some fairly complex systems to manage, but the actual physical flying of the helicopter is quite simple.
Can you tell us a bit about the Lynx? It's actually the fastest helicopter in the world, isn't it?
It holds the helicopter speed record, some 207 knots, which is about 250 miles an hour.
Now today we're seeing some really new manoeuvres. Could you tell us a bit about that?
Yes, we believe in the Silver Eagles that we like to keep the display evolving year by year, and we've in fact reintroduced a manoeuvre which is the hover backflip, and we brought in for the first time the full loop in the Lynx.
Now, for example, the backflip, surely helicopters can't do this?
Well, the Lynx can.
Can you just tell me a little bit about how to do it? Don't to get too technical, but just how can you do a backflip?
Well, basically, what we ask the helicopter to do is to go into a slight climb, holding its position over a point on the ground, and then a back somersault.
And is it dangerous, Colin?
No. If it were, I wouldn't be doing it.
Anything else you're developing within the team?
Not at the moment, but look out next year. We might have a couple of new ones then.
Looking forward to the display. Thank you very much, Colin.
Thank you very much.
And thank you, Estelle. Well, this surely must be the star of Biggin 1993. This is the Russian Sukhoi Su-27. We saw it last year here at Biggin, and it completely thrilled the crowd and myself, I hasten to add. Full reheat. Off he goes, and you will see this aeroplane really thrown around in the most magnificent way by Anatoly Kovachoy, who we saw also last year. He's a test pilot, and he should know what he's doing, and he certainly does. All these maneuvers on this very heavy aircraft, well over 30 tons of it, are thrown around within the Biggin Hill airfield itself. So So that gives you some idea. Now, this maneuver is just quite staggering. Engine's virtually off. Why he doesn't get a flame out, I don't never know. And he just lets it sink right back down on its tail. That must be one of the most historic maneuvers ever done in a jet aircraft. Because the problem is, I'm not quite sure of his secret, if he went backwards too fast, he'd blow the engines out, and then he would come tumbling to the floor. But no, I've seen him do it many times, and what a maneuver it is. Now, picking up the pace in the Sukhoi, as you can see, highly maneuverable, comparable very much to the F-16 Eagle. Usually armed with some 10 missiles and a 30mm cannon. It's believed to have a range of some 800 miles. Now, Anatoly pulls it over in a very, very tight loop for such an enormous aircraft. It can, in fact, reach over 53,000 feet, and very quickly at that. Now, here we see the slow fly past, and you'll see as he goes past the enormous angle of attack as the nose is stuck right up in the air. I'm sure Anatoly can't see very much. Slowing right down there. An amazing performance, keeping that aeroplane in the air by sheer brute force. It's, in fact, commonly known as the flanker, this aircraft. It's designed to counter cruise missiles and low-flying aircraft. All I can say is, thank goodness, we never actually had to see it in combat while the Cold War was on, because I think it would have proved itself beyond any shadow of a doubt. See the rate of roll for such an enormous aeroplane. It's almost like a little pit special up there. Pulling massive G around the turns. And the undercarriage coming down to boot. So Anatoly never lets us down. This is the second year running that we've had an absolutely superb display. The Sukhoi Su-27 flanker. See that tailplane really working as he pulls the aircraft around, and the huge air brake just behind the cockpit there to help slow everything down. And he'll keep the nose in the air for as long as he can to get as much drag off those wings. And again, you can see the tailplane working quite vigorously as he brings this beast to a halt. It's not any big hardware like that, but also hot air balloons. Obviously, we can't fly them here at Biggin today because we've got aircraft in the air, as you can see. This takes us right back to the Great War, 1914-18 war. This was a very successful German aircraft, Fokker D7. Of course, it's not a real one. It's actually a replica. I suppose that war can be classed as probably one of the bloodiest in history. And although it's tinged with nostalgia now, it's certain there was nothing nostalgic about it whatsoever. In this sequence of flying, we were expecting to see the Fokker triplane, which was probably the most successful of the German fighters, flown by the famous or infamous Baron von Richthofen, but I gather it's not working today, so we've got this as a replacement. So just close your eyes and pretend it has 3 sets of wings, and then you won't be far off it. In fact, the Germans, right up until 1917, were winning hands down in the air until this aircraft came along, the SE-5A, which was far more advanced than anything the British had managed to produce before that. As you can see, it actually has a machine gun on it. Now, in the early days of World War I, there weren't even machine guns or any armament at all on aircraft. They were simply used as scouts to help the army. But by 1917, we'd got a number of aces who had perfected the art of knocking down other aircraft. As you can see, a Lewis gun above the pilot there. It was actually on a ratchet, and one of the techniques was to pull it back on the ratchet, come underneath the German aircraft, and fire up into its belly, and thus, of course, getting what they laughingly called a kill. It was, as I say, a very, very bloody conflict indeed, and it wasn't really until the last 18 months that the British actually managed to score anything like victories over the Germans. And there we have a nice Sopwith pup joined in above there, and that sort of concludes our look at the Great War. Oh, this is ridiculous. This is, believe it or not, a car piloted or driven by Colin Fellows. The engine in the back of this thing is a Rolls-Royce Olympus turbo jet, and it's hopefully going to blast him to a new British record. It takes just 6 seconds to reach 272 miles an hour. That's from a standing start. And of course, stopping, not easy either. 4 disc brakes and lots of parachutes. Rather him than me. Gazelles. From the Silver Eagles. Well, we heard from the team leader earlier on in the program. And that is the Lynx that he was talking about, doing some quite spectacular maneuvers. And we're going to see him do his famous or infamous backflip later on. The Lynx was first flown on the 21st of March 1971 and can be used for carrying troops or for anti-tank strike duties. They saw a lovely little, well, I suppose the helicopter equivalent of a wing over there. As Colin pulls it up into the blue yonder yet again, this time going the other way. I've always wondered how helicopters actually ever stayed in the air. Oh. Over he goes. It's not so much fun. Well, it depends which way you look at it. Actually sitting in the cockpit while he does this. And back to the Gazelle again, part of the Silver Eagles display. In fact, the Army has the largest fleet of helicopters in Britain. And this particular team, it's their 25th anniversary. Oh, and here comes this backflip that I was talking about. How on earth do you do that in a helicopter? Colin did say that if we missed it, he'd do it again for us, so let's have another look at that. Oh, over she goes. This is the pilot's eye view, obviously. The Lynx, quite versatile, can be used for search and rescue, casualty evacuation, reconnaissance, and command post duties. Over to Estelle now, talking about hospitals, would you believe?
Oliver Foote, you're president of the Flying Eye Hospital. Could you tell us about Orbis?
Yes, this aeroplane you see has been converted into a teaching hospital for blind people. And what we do is we fly from country to country, mainly in the developing world, and we operate on blind people in the operating room, which is in the middle of the aircraft, at airports throughout the world. At the same time, we teach the doctors and nurses in those countries sight-saving surgical techniques, so they can then go and operate on their own patients after we leave. We've been flying now for 11 years. We've been around the world 4 times. We've visited more than 65 countries and carried out more than 120 3-week programs. On board the aeroplane, inside the operating room, we've actually restored sight to 15,000 blind people. But much more important is that we've transferred sight-saving surgical skills to more than 25,000 doctors and nurses worldwide, who are using these skills on their own patients in their own countries.
Okay, it's an international charity, but just how do you fund the project?
Well, we get our funding from all over the world. We get it from the United States, from the United Kingdom. We're registered as a charity here in the UK, and we get it from Hong Kong. But it's always a struggle, especially with the recession. And every £5 we get really goes towards helping a blind person see.
Now, the hospital uses a DC-8 aircraft, but I believe that you have a project for a DC-10 to be in order next year?
That's right. In fact, this is the oldest DC-8 flying right now. It's something like 32 years old. And it's getting difficult to get parts for it, to get spare parts for it. So through the generosity of two people, one man in Hong Kong and one man in America, we've managed to buy a second-hand DC-10. And we have that in our possession right now. And at this moment, it's being converted into a flying eye hospital, which will replace this DC-8 early next year. And but we're having to find another $5 million to, in fact, convert that into a flying teaching hospital.
Now, the project's been going over 11 years now. Where do you see its future?
Well, the DC-10 is its future, and the DC-10 is going to take over, as I said, early next year. But there are 30 million people who are blind in the world right now who could see again if they receive the proper medical treatment. And that, in a sense, is a criminal tragedy, that there are 30 million people who could see again. And this DC-10 will continue the work of the DC-8, going around the world. We have invitations for the next 5 years to go to countries and to restore sight and to promote the fight against blindness worldwide. So that's our work, working with many other organizations who fight blindness too, to go out there and take those cataracts out and give those people who are blind a real future, and a real vision and real hope in life.
Well, Oliver, thank you for talking to us, and we wish you the best with the Flying Eye Hospital.
Thank you very much.
There's action and adventure in the Sunday movie as the awesome power of one of the most sophisticated war machines takes to the high seas.
I'd say 20,000 feet descending, closing on us fast.
You got something here?
Well, your radar man here thinks he's got a bear on the scope. He'd have to have one hell of a full tank. He can't even get to Hawaii.
Good work, son.
Thank you, sir.
Jim, you're the luckiest cag in the fleet. 2 days out of Miguel, and you've got your own bear hunt.
Well, I figure all we need is one plane to escort his butt out of our airspace. Say, De Palma?
The mission? To intercept a Russian bomber. Testing its crew to the absolute limits. This is the supercarrier. Tonight at 8.
Something totally different, back to World War II, and in fact before World War II, the Fairey Swordfish. Torpedo bomber, and it achieved immortality in World War II in such operations as the sinking of the German battleship Bismarck and the daring raid on the Italian fleet at Taranto Harbour, and on the North Atlantic convoy duties. This year, the Royal Navy have managed to acquire yet another of the Swordfish, which is a very, very welcome addition indeed to the fleet, shall we say. The Swordfish, although it was obsolete by the time the war came along, was quite staggering. And it had so many successes that we could go on all day about it. Oh, and still in the Second World War, in the B-17. Captain Keith Sissons, sitting there on your right, powering this magnificent beast. Shall we call it the American Lancaster? Many thousands of these aircraft came over from America to launch day raids on Germany. Here is the Wooden Wonder, the Mosquito. This is the last one in existence in the world, and the reason it was called the Wooden Wonder was because most of it is wood, would you believe? And there you can see Sally B. Well, there's the famous ball turret, as the Americans used to call it. I'd hate to have sat in that for many hours. Here we have the Crunchy team, the Cadbury's Crunchy Flying Circus, and we've seen them now for many years at the Biggin Hill Airfair. And on top of the wing we have two really lovely ladies. There's Sarah Cubitt and our dear friend Helen Tempest. Helen Tempest was the original And when she first started, she never did things like this. Yes, the aerobatics over the years have been added to what was already an exciting program. If you can imagine standing on that wing doing about 120, 130 miles an hour coming down the hills with nothing really in front of you at all. It's very, very windy up there, I can assure you. I've tried it myself. Aircraft are Boeing Stearmans, the American equivalent, I suppose, of our Tiger Moss, but a much, much bigger version of it. And those girls, I don't know how they keep waving their arms. You can imagine the wind force against you all the time. The secret of wing walking, Helen tells me, is not to wear anything that flaps around, otherwise you'll beat yourself to death up there. And Sally B now takes to the air. All owned and operated by a dedicated group of volunteers. Here goes the Mosquito. This is owned by Rolls-Royce. Two Merlin engines. Rolls-Royce was very, very successfully put their engines into the Lancaster as well as the Spitfire and, of course, the Hurricane. A lovely view of Sally B. You can see that cowling on the inner engine there, the checkered cowling. That is in honor of the late Ted White, who actually bought this aircraft from the French over to Biggin Hill in the late 60s, early 70s. It now resides up at Duxford. There are a number still flying in the world, of course, but this is the only one in the UK, as is the Mosquito. Well, actually, the Mosquito is the only one flying now in the world. What a gentlemanly aircraft the Mosquito is and was. Another view of the B-17 as Keith Sissons brings it in with the Bombay open. Now you can see the disadvantage of the B-17 as against the Lancaster bomber. The Bombay was very, very short indeed. This was to give it the enormous range that it needed. So you could really only drop 500-pound bombs, quite a few of them. But it really was a bit of a disadvantage as compared to the bigger Bombay of the Lancaster. Now this is just stupid. I mean, who on earth wants to do that? Oh, dear, oh dear. Oh. Makes you go all funny just to watch that, doesn't it? It is all done for charity, of course. There's bungee jumping, but now let's go over to Estelle.
Chris Jessen, you're the pilot of this SE5. How difficult is it to fly?
Basically, it's very simple to fly. It's a basic aeroplane, fundamental, original biplane design with all the normal controls and perfectly normal.
This is an actual reconstruction. How close to the original is it?
It's very faithful to the original in all the design, except that it is 3/4 scale and it's got a much lower power engine. This has got a 100 horsepower Continental engine instead of the normal 200 or 180 horsepower Wolseley Viper the original had.
It was first designed in 1917, is that correct?
Well, the original design was 1916, but it reached squadron service in early 1917 and then went on with the Sopwith Camel to regain aerial supremacy for the Allies on the Western Front.
How efficient was it back in 1917?
Well, today, in 1917, it was very efficient. It was one of the first biplanes that could be dived full tilt with full engine power and not lose a wing or some fabric or something like this, which does tend to be a bit distressing.
And compared to the triplane, how is it to fly?
It's a lot easier. It's a much more stable, yeah, stable is a good word for it, aeroplane than the triplane.
And what do you actually do in the aerial display?
We try and demonstrate all the various facets of flying in the First World War, from trench strafing, which is the beginning of the sequence, to the problems of being bounced by enemy aircraft at low level, when you haven't got any airspeed, and you've then got to turn and combat. And that's what we then demonstrate next, the various attempts to get on each other's tails to shoot the other one down.
Is there anything you have to watch? Does it have any idiosyncrasies?
None really. Yeah, I think in general it's a very good, very simple airplane to fly. If you hit one of the other person's slipstream during the turn, it can get a little bit awkward, but it can be perfectly controllable, no problem.
You enjoy flying it?
Oh, very much. Very much.
Thank you very much, Chris.
Okay.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, the moment we always wait for here at Biggin Hill. This is the 1993 Red Arrows. And while the Reds are doing their immaculate display, the Puma, medium-sized helicopter, is just taxiing out ready for his display. We'll see him in a minute. But back up in the air, this magnificent sight, the Royal Air Force Aerobatics team, the Red Arrows. I suppose they're known pretty well everywhere in the world, and they never cease to amaze us. Every year they've got something new in the program like that. They fly very, very close together, about 6 feet apart in some of these maneuvers. In fact, it was my good fortune to fly with them a few years ago, so sitting in that back seat was really rather hairy. The Hawk, of course, is the display aircraft now. The one before used to be the Gnat. And prior to the Red Arrows, it was the Yellow Jacks from RAF Valley. But over the years, this team has grown to be probably the best in the world. And it's maneuvers like that that gives you the reason why. Each pilot stays with the team for 3 years. It's done on a rotation system so that you'll lose 2 pilots every year. This gives the others a chance in the Royal Air Force. Of course, it's a great honor to fly with this team, and you have to be a frontline fighter pilot with great experience before you can join. And now you can see why with these ridgebacks, which look so easy, but believe you me, when you're up with them, not as easy as it looks. It's quite interesting that most pilots view their time with the Reds as their sort of farewell to the Air Force. I think quite a large proportion of them actually retire from the force after this, because I suppose it's something that you really can't beat. Others, of course, go on to train other frontline fighter pilots or go on to bigger commands themselves. Back to the Hercules again, almost back to where we started, but not quite. This Hercules is transporting our parachutists, the Falcons, the RAF team, who we're going to see later on in the program, but of course they have to gain a little height first. And here's the Puma. We saw that a few minutes ago. It's a medium-sized helicopter. It was originally developed for the French Air Force, and it had to be able to operate day or night in all weathers and in all climates. It was selected for the RAF's tactical transport program way back in 1967 in a joint production agreement, and that was between Aerospatiale and Westland. Powered by 2 turbo engines, has a range of something like 355 miles, or that's 572 kilometers, with a maximum speed of 168 miles per hour. It can be equipped with a side-firing 20mm cannon, and that can be quite useful, of course, or 7.62mm machine guns, missiles, and of course rockets. And it can carry 16 troops or 20 passengers, depending on what configuration it has. The Puma. Into another cockpit, this time the Hercules, and we've got all those Falcons in the back. They can't wait to jump. They never can, actually. They seem to love it. Every week they're doing 2 or 3 displays in the summer. They absolutely adore it. Up goes the Hercules, and with a bit of luck we might get another shot at. Yes, here we are, back in the cockpit again, and you can see that it's actually quite massive. It's a huge cockpit in the Hercules, because remember, the crews have to sit in that little office, as they call it, for many, many hours, especially when they're doing long-distance stuff and dropping supplies and cargo in either a war situation or a famine situation. But today, as I say, we've got all those Falcons in the back, and they're now getting themselves ready while the crew just get this aircraft up to the cloud base, which I think is about 4,500 feet. In the meantime, our friendly Puma is coming in, by the looks of it, to land. Now to a relatively new team we've seen in the last couple of years, the Team Toyota. A couple of pit specials, doing some really hairy stuff. Tiny little aeroplane, quite a contrast to the stuff that we've just been looking at. Very high power to weight ratio, you can fling them around, and here is an extra 300. Flown by Nigel Lamb. And Nigel Lamb 7 times has been British aerobatic champion. That really takes some doing. It was the late Neil Williams, I think, who had something like that kind of record. And when you watch Nigel in this hairy little beast, you'll see exactly why. The pits leader is Steve Johnson. He leads the pits duo, and his next Red Arrow, in fact. I remember he had that rather unfortunate near accident when he hit a mast at Brighton, but he still tried to fly even that day. And now you can see why. A very brave man, and also a very, very competent pilot indeed. And he's accompanied by Lee Proudfoot. Here comes Helen, still waving. She's always waving every time I see her. We go to the bar afterwards and she'll still be waving. And now this maneuver really is quite something. Mirror formation from the 2 pits, while Nigel Lamb actually barrel rolls around the 2 aircraft. The control needed by all 3 pilots for this maneuver is really quite staggering. Now you can see why Nigel has been British champion no less than 7 times.
I'm talking to Peter Brown, who's the chief engineer of the B-17 Sally B. Now, Peter, we all remember her famous film role in The Memphis Belle. Could you tell me a little bit about that, please?
Yes, the film was carried out by 5 B-17s, Sally B being one of them, and 2 came over from the States and the other 2 from France. And I was employed by the film company as the aeronautical engineer looking after the 5 B-17s.
Are they very difficult to maintain?
They're a relatively simple aeroplane, and having been involved with old aeroplanes in my younger days in the industry, no, they're quite reasonable to maintain. Yeah.
Now, we can see the checkered cowling on the engine here. Just could you tell me what that is all about?
Yes, that's in memorial to the founder of the B-17 Preservation Society, a fellow called Ted White, who was sadly killed in Harvard, and the Harvard had the same checkered cowling, so we thought it fitting to paint our engine in the number 3 position, so Ted is virtually flying with us all the time.
Oh, it's in his memory. Now, it's got a very romantic image, hasn't it? Why do you think people love this plane?
I think they can associate an awful lot with it. Whatever generation they're from, I think there's a lot of nostalgia around the B-17, both sides of the Atlantic, and there's been a lot said, written about it, and of course it was a major part of the war operation. And I think that's really why.
It's a very solid machine. Just tell me what makes it so good.
Well, the construction of it is very solid. The spar is a bridge-like construction, and it has no life in it, and it's built very solid, obviously, to withstand an awful lot of damage. And you may have seen films of them coming back with, you know, in bits, but still getting back to the UK.
Are they easy to handle?
They're a very steady aeroplane. They're quite heavy on the controls, being an older type of aeroplane. You know, none of the sophistication of flying controls, but yeah, that's the only disadvantage. They're very heavy.
And where's its future? They're easy to maintain, obviously, but what about their parts and things?
The parts themselves, like all things in life, are available at a price. We have formed ourselves into a co-op with the Americans, who also own B-17s, and we get a lot of dealing through those. So with that side of it over there, that we can maintain them.
Well, she's a beautiful beast, and we look forward to having a look round her. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joe.
This is something quite ridiculous, really. This is an airliner, would you believe it or not, and it belongs to the Netherlands Air Force. It's the F-27 troop ship, and it puts on a display more like a fighter than literally an airliner, which is what it was designed for. It was designed by Focke-Wulf, and it's been around for about 30 years, this design, but it's what the crew do with this aircraft that really make it unique. Major Royal Jensen is at the controls, and as you can see, he really throws it around the sky. He switches the engines off, he switches them on, he does pretty well everything that could possibly be done with an aeroplane. This, of course, needs no introduction. This is the latest mark of Harrier, the GR7. Now, how would you like to do a landing like this when you came into Luton? It would certainly knock the gin and tonics over, I think. It's amazing what can be done with an airliner. Really rather reassuring when you think about it. And there are those Falcons, the RAF parachute team. As you can hear, they can't wait to get out of that aeroplane. And all that smoke, of course, that's coming from their heels. They've got these smoke canisters on as they do a little bit of free falling. Obviously, the height was just not high enough to do a longer free fall. But there you can see them all sorting themselves out, trying to get themselves into their famous spiral on their wonderful paragliders. A lot different to the old mushroom-shaped parachutes that we all know and love. These are really like little airplanes. You know, you can really fly these wings, these flying wings. And there you are, you can see the stack now coming together. Very, very difficult to do. There is a marker on the ground that they will all be aiming for. And knowing the Falcons, they'll land pretty accurately. The jump master will have sorted out the winds for them from the air and dropped his marker earlier. And here comes the team leader with the RAF flag just behind him. And of course he looks up to see where the rest of the team is, and obviously one or two have already landed, and in they come, one after another. Now, usually when you have a parachute, you fall over when you hit the ground, but I don't think you'll see these boys doing that. Step onto the ground, look at that. Absolutely brilliant. Harrier. And what an aircraft this is. Harrier, just being brought in for a touch and go. Oof, and what a touch and go. You don't need to mow the lawn after using one of these things. Flown by Flight Lieutenant Robert Lee. This is the Harrier GR7. It's the latest model. It's stationed at RAF Wittering. That's where pilots are trained in ground attack and reconnaissance. It's a very famous vertical takeoff jet, probably the most famous in the world. Many countries have tried to do a similar thing, but they've never really succeeded with one engine. The secret of Harrier is its Pegasus engine, and you can just see there the nozzles on the side of the aircraft which vector the down thrust, and there you can see Harrier just hovering in the air. Go forwards, up, outside, and back. We'll see in a minute. There we go. claim to fame, really, the naval version in the Falkland Islands. You can viv the aircraft. In other words, you're going along at 600 knots. You can actually make the thing seemingly go almost backwards. In fact, it doesn't. It's relative to the aircraft attacking you on your tail, and you just dodge out of the way. And there you can see exactly that. Harrier going backwards. As I say, the Russians tried it. They could do it with 2 engines, but certainly not with 1. And the Americans are going to build Harrier under license in the not too distant future, a slightly bigger version and a more powerful version. Very, very versatile. You can land it in woodlands. You don't need airfields. What more could you ask? And Robert Lee does a final bow for us as he brings Harrier in for a reasonably conventional landing. Well, Harrier certainly must be a fitting end to Biggin 1993. Hope you've enjoyed the show, and we'll see you in '94.